Lust Corrupts, Part 1. Hiram always valued wisdom, but he became enamored and lost in the idea of possessing the wisdom in a material way. SOF 610. Hiram dwelt long in Egypt and absorbed its wisdom, but the thing which delighted his heart the most was the tale of its long-hidden treasures. He learned about the nest-burning bird, whose wondrous many-hued egg granted men the gift of eternal life. He heard about the serpent pearls and the bright jewels which glowed with the light of the sun, even on the darkest night. All these things he desired to possess for himself. Did Hiram set out to use the shepherd, or did he still have a heart that was swayed by love? SOF 611. The nesting place of the nest-burning bird was among the Mothbenim, eastward of Egypt, but among the treasures of Egypt was one of its eggs. The egg, the pearls, and the jewels were safeguarded in a dark cave upon an island called En-Mishpet, which was set in the middle of a lake called Sedana. In the waters of the lake were fearsome water monsters, part beast, part fish. On the shores of the lake dwelt the shape-shifting priests, guardians of the treasures. SOF 612. Northward of the lake was a broad pasture land where the shepherd Namen tended the temple flocks, but Namen was old and had no son who would follow him. Therefore he took Hiram into his household, and Hiram became as a son to him, tending the sheep of the temple, and no Egyptian was with him. Did God by chance provide an alternative to remind Hiram, maybe even try and stop him from damaging his own soul before it was too late? Whatever the case is, Hiram was offered a second treasure, this one for the spirit. Would Hiram embrace this treasure or still lust after the earthly one? SOF 613. One day, while the sheep still suckled their lambs, Hiram was out in the pastures, sitting near the cool waters because of the heat. As he reclined in the shade, he played gay shepherd tunes on his flute, and in the many times he had been there, no one had ever disturbed him. Yet, not far away was the house of the virgins of Ellery, but the maidens who dwelt there rarely went abroad. SOF 614. This day, however, Asu, daughter of the high priest, walked abroad, and hearing the melody of the flute, drew near to listen. But Hiram did not see her because of the bush between them. The maiden sat down, taking the sandals off her feet. SOF 615. Hearing a cry from one of the sheep in the distance, Hiram stopped playing and stood up, his back towards the maiden. She, seeing him standing up, sought to creep away before he saw her, but as she did so, her foot was pierced by a thorn, and she let out a cry of pain. Hiram turned, and seeing her distress, hastened to help her. He withdrew the thorn tenderly and carried her down to the pool so that she could bathe the foot in cool waters. While she did so, he entertained her with sweet melodies on his flute. SOF 616. The maiden fell in love with Hiram, and he with her, but because she was a dedicated virgin and daughter of the high priest, neither could open the doors of their heart. The maiden spent nights weeping, for she had a love for which there was no remedy. Hiram took his flock to other pastures, but still their hearts drew them back to the place of meeting, and they met again and yet again. I find it ironic that a man valuing wisdom failed to recognize wisdom is not a thing you can steal. It must be bestowed and earned through labor. Yet he still fell into the all-too-earthly flaw of valuing things over experience and knowledge, treating it as a possession you can touch. Even the wisest can fall prey to human frailty. In fact, I'd say the danger is greater the more wisdom you think you have, because wisdom and pride goes before a fall. Lust Corrupts, Part 2. The wife of Naaman offered a kind ear and voice, but she understood it could not be of much comfort. And again I ask, was God even now creating a scenario and using Hiram to set the scene to give Hiram the treasure that God intended him to have all along? I find Hiram's ability of self-delusion
SOF
sad.
617.
He wants both, and
Now
he
the
uses
wife
the claim
of
that having
Namen
noticed
noticed
that
that
he
Hiram
couldn't give it up or
pined
let it
with
lie
a sickness,
hidden,
and she spoke to him
corrupting
about it.
The
And he
wife
told
of
her
Namen
Asu,
offers a choice,
the
but
maiden
instead
from
he
the house
chooses
of
to
the
try
virgins of
and
Ellery.
have both.
The wife of
This was
Namen
his
spoke
moment to
words
turn
of
away, and he
consolation
was
for
too
the
far
hopeless
gone to
love,
realize.
knowing they helped but little.
The wife of Naaman sought out Asu. She had no way of knowing that Hiram was seeking the forbidden treasure, because Hiram understood it was wrong and feared to let anybody know, so he kept it hidden, a sign that even then he knew it was wrong, but was not listening to his conscience because he lusted to possess it. So Naaman, who believed his heart was really seeking the love of Asu, was planning to give him what she thought he wanted. Again, Hiram is focused on something he shouldn't have, while fate or God was providing him what he needed.
SOF 618. In the fullness of the year, Hiram took his flock to distant pastures around the other side of the lake. While he was away, the wife of Namen took herself down to the place where he was wont to meet Asu, and one day Asu came. She was known to the wife of Namen, who was the gatherer of herbs for the temple. They spoke of many things, of Hiram, and of the gods, of priests and their ways, and of temples, and those who served in them, of life, and of man and of woman.
All too often God is advising us, giving us direction, but we want what will give us a finite material thing only of value on earth. It's not that God isn't listening, but that we misunderstand that God is not a sugar daddy seeking to buy or bribe your love and devotion. Lust Currupts, Part 3. The Collision. When you've achieved the wrong goal and find the real treasure, but thought he couldn't have it. Did he even love Asu, or just lust after her? How will Hiram choose, spiritual or earthly treasure?
SOF 619. Now when Hiram returned, it was nigh the feast of sheep slaying, and at this time sacrifices of lambs were made to the water monsters in the lake. While away, Hiram had thought about Asu and about the treasure of Egypt, both seemingly equally unattainable. The wife of Namen spoke to him rarely, and Hiram wondered, for this is not the way of women. SOF 620. On the eve of the feast of sheep slaying, the lake boats were prepared for the annual pilgrimage to the island. Among those was the great boat of Arab, kept in memory of the day when the scorcher of heaven rose with the sun, and earth was overwhelmed. For this boat, the sacrificial lambs were offered to the water monsters, and on it served Asu and 8 virgins. There, too, the high priest officiated. SOF 621. Hiram had conceived a plan within his mind whereby, at the risk of his life, he might possess himself of the treasures of Egypt. This year, Namen being now frail, he alone would be in charge of the sacrificial lambs. Together with 2 boy priests to assist him, they came from the temple of the lake, dedicated to the bright-bearded one, who once saved earth from destruction through fiery hail by making a 3rd round. SOF 622. On the night before the festival, Hiram stepped with his small flock beside the boats, and at first light they were put aboard. As the sun rose upon high, the high priest came with many other priests and princes, and the virgins came also. They offered sacrifices at the temple of departure, and then set out upon the waters. In another boat were Namen and his wife, and there were other boats filled with people. SOF 623. After making offerings upon the waters, the boats arrived at the island, and preparations were made for the island ceremony, which lasted throughout the night. The lambs were offered as darkness came, and the waters became red with blood, and the water monsters satiated with meat. SOF 624. Now the cave on the island was protected from men by the spirit of Mot, who had died there in days long forgotten, and the priest guarded its entrance. But Hiram did not fear the spirit of Mot, for it could do no harm to one who carried upon his body the same blood scar as Mot had borne. Hiram, the stranger, had been so marked out from other men in his childhood. Clearly he wanted both, but instead of focusing on the treasure of the heart, his focus was still on the lust of possession. Lust Currupts, Part 4. Callous or avarice? Did Hiram care for his Sue, or did he just lust for her? Seems to me if you love someone, choosing her would have been the easiest choice to make. Every step, it seems his caring was a convenience and little to do with love. SOF 625. At the 6th hour of the night, 3 virgins entered the cave to bring forth the treasures, and with them went a priest, protected by sanctification in the blood of a lamb. 5 priests who were guardians of the treasures and never left the island also went into the cave with them, garbed in skins and masked with the heads of beasts. The treasures were brought forth and placed upon the altar against the rock wall beside the cave, so that all might behold them. Over the altar was laid a cloth of linen and gold. While the people passed before the treasures and danced and sang, priests came and went in the cave. SOF 626. Before the cave and away from the road leading down to the lake, there was a pathway which went down to the pool of purification. Here, after the maidens had bathed, men and women came down one by one to be purified in its waters. They then went through an opening into the lake, and passing through the waters along the shore, where they rose, not much above the waist, ascended by steps through a small arched temple back on the road. If they were truly purified, they were never touched by water monsters. SOF 627. Never had a maiden been taken by the water monsters, but on this awful night, while a maiden passed between pool and temple, there was a loud cry of agony, quickly stifled. The island fell silent with foreboding, and as the night passed, the name of Asu was whispered from mouth to mouth. The treasures were carried back in gloom and silence under a mantle of dread, and the head of the high priest was bowed in sorrow and disgrace. SOF 628. When the boats departed, none noticed that Hiram was missing. For his duty done, he could return in any boat, and none saw the strange craft that clove the waters of the lake of Sadana. That night, Hiram returned to the shepherd hut of Namen, and nothing was said to him, for Namen thought he had joined with the people, sorrowing in the temples, and always many remained about for several days. Clearly he wanted both, but instead of focusing on the treasure of the heart, his focus was still split. And ultimately, I think he wanted the lust of the possessions far more than he wanted the spiritual love of Asu. Lust Corrupts, Part 5. All is found out, and this is the point of no return. SOF 629. When Hiram had refreshed himself, he left Namen, who was weary and weighed down with age and sorrow, and prepared to return to his flocks. In his grief, because of the death of Asu, he could find solace nowhere, except perhaps in the familiar solitude among his sheep. But the wife of Namen said, "Let me walk with you a little way, for I too suffer, and yet must seek herbs which are needed and not easy to find." When they had gone some distance, she said, "I go this way. Will you not accompany me and humor an old woman who may need your aid?" SOF 630. Hiram did so, for the woman was even as his own mother. Though he could not understand her strange manner, she brought him to a place in a hollow enclosed by thickets, and lo, there was Asu! When the embraces and the greetings were over, and the explanations given, the wife of Namen said, "Here you cannot remain. There are clothes and food, and no pursuers will follow the maiden, and none will query your departure. Go this night, taking thought for nothing here, for you are young with a lifetime of joy before you, after the pangs of parting have passed." SOF 631. Hiram said, "No gladness, no joy can ever surpass what I now feel. Yet this thing increases a burden already upon me and is less simple than it appears. For this you must know, I have taken the treasures of Egypt and hidden them in a place where no man can find them. Who would suspect me if I went about my task without change, a shepherd with no thought beyond his sheep and flute? The cry may be raised even now, though I think another day will pass first. Then who could trace the passage of every man who has departed, even though pursuit is made in all directions? Why did you not tell me of your plot?" Fate offers him the treasure of his spirit. Will he even now turn and embrace the treasure of his heart, or the lust for physical things? SOF 632. The wife of Namen said, "How could you be told of something which might not have been, or which you might have betrayed by glance or bearing? We too thought you no more than a simple shepherd with no thought beyond flute playing, except love. What now? Will you flee with the maiden and abandon the treasures? Or shall she flee alone, for she is committed to flight?" Wishing that he had known, Hiram complains if only he knew, maybe he wouldn't have stolen, blaming others when the fact is stealing was always wrong. Truly he was too lost and not able to blame himself. He thought he could never have a sou, so instead he went after the thing that he was certain he could get of his own efforts. He wanted certainty of gain, and now he complains because he has both, and wants both, won't give either up. SOF 633. Hiram said, "I cannot abandon love for treasure, but neither can I abandon this treasure for life, or let it corrupt. Therefore let a Sioux, the maiden, disguise herself, and together we will depart to a safe place without the treasure, none suspecting. She still lives. Then in the fullness of time I will return and recover the treasure, for no man can discover its hiding place. However, I will not depart in haste, but wait and bid Namen farewell, and go in the fullness of time." SOF 634. Hiram left a Sioux and returned with the wife of Namen. Coming unto Namen, Hiram told him he had a vision, such as no man could disregard, and must go to the land of his fathers, but would return before the coming again of the season. That night a great cry went up among the temples, and in the light of the morning men came and questioned the men, and those with him, but found them simple shepherds. SOF 635. Hiram departed, taking the ass of Namen, and with him went the wife of Namen. They were joined by a Sioux, cloaked as a beggar girl, who earned her food by ungainly dancing, whose face was unwashed and clothes unclean. They accompanied men who hunted for the stolen treasures, and their possessions were opened before the eyes of all men. After 7 days, the wife of Namen returned. I find Hiram's ability of self-delusion sad. He wants both, and he uses the claim that having hidden it, he couldn't give it up or let it lie hidden, a risk corrupting it. The wife of Namen offers a choice, but instead he chooses to try and have both. This was his moment to turn away, and he was too far gone to realize. Lust Corrupts, Part 6. The Repercussions of Choosing the Wrong Path. SOF 636. Hiram and a Sioux went onwards until they came to Bethlehem, near Phoenice, beyond the borders of Egypt, and they dwelt there among the Cherubim. In the fullness of time, Hiram returned to Egypt and recovered the treasures, bringing them inside skins hidden within other skins, filled with water and oil. SOF 637. Now when Hiram had left Egypt and drawn nigh to Bethlehem, he saw that the dwelling he had left no longer stood, and the fields about it were overgrown with burning bushes. Within the burnt-out ruins he found remains and bones, and knew them for those of a Sioux, and the Cherubim with whom she dwelt. He saw that they had died by the sword. SOF 638. Hiram did not linger at the place of death and thought to take himself to a place of safety. But knowing the dangers of the land, he sought a place where he hid the egg of the nest-burning bird and the pearls, all except two, and most of the jewels, having secured them in safety, he went on his way. Leaving a Sioux to claim the treasure, he leaves unguarded the treasure he already possessed, and loses it as well. SOF 639. Hiram kept going until he came upon a small wooded place nearly 2 days' journey away. Here, while he slept, 2 wild swine came and swallowed 3 of the jewels, which he had tied in a piece of hide. Later, he lost one while fording a river, and one was taken from him when he sought shelter in a temple. 2 pearls and 2 jewels were taken from him by other priests who placed them in the treasury of their god. The remaining treasures which he had with him were lost when he was waylaid, and though his life was spared, he was left bleeding and near to death. As Hiram lay by the roadside, he was succored by wandering metal workers and brought back to health by them, for they were men of his own blood. He now loses some of the treasure that already cost him the treasure that called to his spirit. In the end, it nearly cost him his life. SOF 640. Hiram remained with the metal workers for some years and learned their craft. He became skilled in the making of weapons and in their use. In the fullness of time, he returned to the place where he had secreted the treasures and recovered them. He then went down to a city by the sea and took a ship to a far-off land. No man has seen him since, but it is said he married the daughter of a king and became a prince among foreign people. Eventually, he does get to enjoy his earthly reward, but after a hard struggle, he chose a path many take, what he saw as an easy path that let him have everything, only to find it was a deception. He may be wiser, but I wonder, does he regret the loss? Does he even blame himself for his rashness in youth and the death of a Sioux? We don't know, but to me it is a sad tale, not one to be proud of, but one to pity. I feel remorse for all of them trying to force a future instead of accepting the gifts as they come, not recognizing that sometimes what you want is not what you need, and God will not give you what you want, only what your soul needs at that moment. You are ready for it. This was long, but I think as a morality tale it has value. I find Hiram's ability of self-delusion sad. He wants both, and he uses the claim that having hidden it, he couldn't give it up or let it lie hidden, risk corrupting it. The wife of Namin offers a choice, but instead he chooses to try and have both. This was his moment to turn away, and he was too far gone to realize.